Hello, I'm Emeritus, and welcome to CRAM. Thanks for joining me as we explore new and innovative research and big ideas that may change the way you think and act. Well, I'm sure you've asked yourself this question maybe a few times in your life. Who am I? You may think you know yourself. Well, I'm a pretty nice person. And then you discover others see you differently. Oh, what a jerk. Sometimes you act one way, and then other times you act in a way that's so not you. And there are times when you feel unique, that there is no one else like you. And other times when you feel just like everyone else. Who are you really? Brian Little is a pioneer in the study of human personality and well-being. He's a distinguished research professor emeritus at Carleton University, and he's taught at many schools, including Oxford, McGill, Harvard, and Cambridge. And in fact, he was voted most popular professor by graduating classes at Harvard for 4 years in a row. He's here to talk about the puzzle of personality. Welcome, Brian. I'm thrilled to have you here.
Thank you very much, Mary. Delighted to be here.
How did you get interested in this field of personality psychology?
Oh, it was an interesting route. I was originally most interested in neuropsychology. And one day I was in the very first graduating class at the University of Victoria. In fact, I think I'm the first male graduate of UVic. And the year before I graduated, I was looking for an atlas of the brain with all technical details in it and so on. And I inadvertently picked up a book by George Kelly called The Psychology of Personal Constructs. And I said, hey, I think I've heard of this fellow. So I sat down on the floor. And about 3 or 4 hours later, I got up and I totally changed my plans. It was about human personality. I'd already been accepted into grad school at Berkeley. And so I went down there and said, please, may I switch from neuroscience into personality? And they said, no. So I said, please. And they said, oh, okay. And that's how I actually got into the field of personality. And I guess I've always been intrigued about people and why they do what they do.
You say, you have this fascinating line, and you say that we're like some people, we can be like other people, and then we're like no other people. How is that possible?
I think it's part of the nature of the creature. We're a strange little species. And there are certain aspects of our behavior that we share with others. There are aspects of personality, to focus on that, where we can be seen as aligning with other individuals. And then there are aspects of ourselves that are so idiosyncratic and singular that it makes no sense to say compared with whom. It is compared with yourself. It's what we call intra-individual differences rather than inter-individual differences. And I think that is a mantra that has been part of the field of personality psychology and personality science, a larger subsumptive domain, since its inception, these 3 aspects of the human condition. And what I've been spending most of my time on, and what the field has been mostly concerned with over the years, has been with how we differ from other individuals. And what my distinctive contribution has been is on how are we like no other person. So I often like to begin by discussing what I call the big 5 traits of personality and the consequences they have for human flourishing. And then get into, and typically when I'm lecturing on this, I stop halfway and say, is that it? Is that all we are? And a lot of people say, yes, that's all we are. And they don't want to hear the rest of how we are idiosyncratic and singular. But I insist, or I won't let them out of the classroom.
So let's talk about those 5 dimensions of personality that you use as an acronym.
Yes, suppose an ocean. OCEAN. So O stands for, I'll give the what we call the emergent side of it first: openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And just a brief word of what they're about. Um, Openness to experience is characterizes individuals who are have a very low threshold that's easily engaged with the world. They're excited, they're curious. They also are very creative and have a disposition to creativity. Whether they actually end up accomplishing anything that's a creative product is another matter. But they certainly have the disposition to be creative, and one characteristic of that is that they're open not just to positive experiences, but also to negative experiences. So, highly creative individuals will often have ups and downs in mood. They will find themselves overjoyed when the creative project is going well and crestfallen when something seems to be hindering its progress. And so, the highly open to experience person has this engagement with the world, and they also have a kind of emotional or affective engagement and potential vulnerability, depending on how their projects
Hmm.
pursue. They also excel in fields that require novel solutions, as you would expect. The C in ocean, conscientiousness, are individuals who get things done. They get them done on time. They're reliable, um, and we love to have them as our partners, work partners, because we can rely on them, and they're always there when we need them. And it's not surprising that highly conscientious individuals, in contrast to those who are more lackadaisical and informal and so on, the highly conscientious ones, not surprisingly, do better in school, in their occupational and professional lives. They move up in corporate ladders more effectively, and so on. That's understandable and pretty logical entailment from what we've described them as having as traits. What may not be as obvious is that they live longer and they're healthier. And
Mm.
I think the reason for this is highly conscientious individuals are more likely to take into account the health regimen specified by their doctors. They will follow rules. They'll wear their seatbelt. They do things that engender a healthier lifestyle, and they actually do live longer. And so the happy-go-lucky, not so conscientious person is more likely to actually run into things like, accidents, and forget that they're on a diet when they're at the office party and so on. So
Oh,
those
that's
are,
fascinating. So
yeah,
I was just going to say the conscientious person is sounds like that person is conscientious with others and themselves
good
and
point.
taking care of themselves. Hmm.
Good point. Precisely, yes.
Okay.
Yep. Extroversion, this is something that probably, along with neuroticism, is the most studied of these big five dimensions, is characterized by seeking out positive stimulation. And it is, it may manifest itself in a kind of curiosity, not unlike the open to experience person, but they love loud noises. They throw themselves into stimulating situations that are positive in particular, such as social engagement. And so it's not just they like people. They may or may not like people, but they need to have the stimulation of others. So in a meeting, the extrovert wants to engage with the others, and they love, notice I say they rather than we, because I'm the very opposite of this, but they like to have problem solving meetings where you're all talking together. It drives me crazy, because as a more introverted person, I don't want that stimulation. I'm already overstimulated in the parts of the brain that are sensitive to these phenomena, and consequently, group brainstorming on a webcam is the last place that I could be in order to be lucid. I need to get away. In fact, I may go away right now. Just disappear and think a bit,
Please
and
don't go
then
away.
return in order to go away in order to lower my level of arousal so that I can concentrate and have some claim to lucidity. So that's the extrovert, the introvert contrasting.
Okay, Brian, let me stop you there for 1 sec. You said something that really caught me. You said that extroverts don't necessarily like people. They may or they may not.
Right.
And I think there's an assumption among many people that extroverts automatically, by just the fact that they're an extrovert, they like people, and that introverts may not necessarily like people, and that's why they don't hang around them all the time.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting what you said.
Well, yeah, and I think you've hit it exactly right. We can make sense of this by looking at the fourth of the big five: agreeableness. Now, for example, I'm definitely not an extrovert, although people may say they think I am, but for reasons I could explain, I'm not. But I'm highly agreeable, and that means that I do enjoy interacting with people. I primarily like to do it one-on-one, though, which is far more meaningful to me than doing it with 5 or 6 people. Is the worst kind of group you can have if you're an introvert and you're interacting with them, because, and I'll get to this in a minute with neurotics, neurotically introverted individuals are primarily focused on avoiding punishment and conflict, and they're conflict avoiders. And that means that when they are interacting in a group of 4, 5, 6, there's a potential for for them to say something that delights one person but offends another person. And so it's a much more conflict potential situation. The extrovert just says, we're all here together, no problems. Oh, so Mary's pissed off at me. I don't care. So the highly agreeable person enjoys encounters, is that people love them in groups because they congeal things. They remove conflict. They anticipate conflict and create situations in which people get along. The opposite of that, the disagreeable people. At first, you would think, boy, you really don't want to be on that end of the spectrum. But there are certain things about disagreeable people that are valuable, particularly to the social group. First, let's see some of the negative things. They are particularly at risk in the health domain. Those who are disagreeable are more. Remember when we used to talk about type A personality? It was a hard-driven, time-pressured person, and so on.
Right.
Well, those who are low in agreeableness might be characterized by that, but they are. It's not time pressure. That's not the behavioral pathogen. The pathogen is hostility, which is one aspect of low agreeableness. So just as conscientiousness was a positive predictor of health, low agreeableness is a negative predictor of health, and that is a risk factor for them. Now, on the positive side, what's positive about being disagreeable? Well, you can battle things. You can stand up for things. You are much more likely as a disagreeable person to confront injustice. A nice person doesn't intervene and say, hold it there. We can't do this. This is unfair, because that's introducing a whole wad of conflict into a situation. The disagreeable person said, I don't care if this ticks you all off. We can't do this to this child or to this elderly parent. And the ability to stand up and declare what you believe is right conflict notwithstanding, is something that highly disagreeable people can perform better than their more agreeable colleagues. And then finally, there's neuroticism. And I think the term it's not a very helpful term in that it has a kind of aura of negativity about it. Of course, it does. Except in some artistic circles, you want to be appropriately neurotic in order to show that you're a deeply sensitive person. And that's great. Why don't we call you just sensitive? And I think sensitivity is probably a better label than neuroticism. But then that would make it OCAS instead of ocean. And so there's some resistance to
that's not neat.
That.
Yeah.
We live by our acronyms.
Well, I'm glad that you clarified a lot of this, because initially, when I first heard you describe each one of those letters, I assumed that, openness, conscientiousness, being an extrovert, well, not necessarily an extrovert, but anyway, being agreeable for sure, that those were all good things.
Yep.
But you're not necessarily saying those are good, right? Because you've also pointed out good things about being disagreeable.
Yes.
And looking at neuroticism, there are good things about being sensitive. So are you saying these are neutral terms?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. It's important. Let's go back to conscientiousness for a second. Remember, I was saying that it predicts success in almost all fields. The highly conscientious person does. So, is there anything good about being less conscientious? Well, there was a wonderful study that was done in which it was shown that being highly conscientious was actually negatively associated with ratings of your job effectiveness. And that was with jazz musicians. And I thought, that is really fascinating, because what do jazz musicians, what do they do? They're jamming. And conscientiousness is characterized by a slavish attention to what's right in front of you. You get the job done. And if you're in a jazz quartet and you're jamming, you need to be open to the intimation of a key change, of a chord change, of a mood shift. And if you're highly conscientious, you may just not be disposed to doing that as much as the more lackadaisical, sort of informal, non-conscientious person. So, and if we extrapolate from jazz quartets or quintets, a lot of organizations now are such that your organization is more likely to be like a jazz quartet than it is a structured organization, because we're more project oriented now and so on. And so I think that we can take for each of the big five, you can make a plausible case that there are virtues or capacities that redound to the social good at both ends. But there's obviously an asymmetry that, generally speaking, being open, conscientious, extroverted within limits, agreeableness, and the opposite of neuroticism are regarded as, for example, requisite for professionalism. And they're highly desired, and people want to change if they're on the lower ends of those scales. They want to change. And there's lots of recent evidence about the desire of people to change personality. And there's also a lot of evidence right now that people are not just they don't just stick to one end. People are both extroverted and introverted in their daily lives. And what I've been most interested in are what are some of the reasons why an introverted person might want to become, and actually does become, extroverted, a kind of on-site extrovert, as Robin Williams once described himself. He's very introverted. But
Brian, I find that interesting too, because my follow-up question would be, okay, so let's just say you fall somewhere along the spectrum for each of these traits. How fixed are they? Right? Yeah. I mean, then maybe I'm also getting into the question of nature nurture. Are we born with a certain amount of agreeableness? And what's the story there?
The story has been shifting over the last couple of decades. Uh, when some of the early researchers in personality talked about stability, they said that by the age of 30, your traits are set like plaster. And I think they only got that 50% right. I think we're essentially half plastered. And if I can invoke a Britishism, uh, and that there's lots of evidence now that traits are not fixed; they're contingent upon various situations, or in our own work that I've been doing with my lab students over the years on the projects you're pursuing. So for me, a core project in my life is professing. And I think when you're a professor, you ought to profess, which means conveying with passion what you believe to be true, no holds barred. And if that stance means you have to stand on your head at 8:30 in the morning to keep the students excited, you do it. Is it part of your nature? Not really. For me, I'm very introverted. I overload easily. But you do it because of the passion for the projects that you pursue. And that, I
Okay, so
think,
let me stop you there.
sure.
Yeah, just because you introduced now this new concept of core project and that one of
Yes.
your core projects is professing, but what do you mean by a core project?
These are the things that matter to you very deeply in your life. And there are certain projects in our lives, you can call them goals. That's too future oriented. I think a lot of it, I think some projects are future goals, of course, but there are also things that we've got to do because it's Tuesday. We have to pick up our kids on Tuesday, or we have to take mom to the optometrist on Tuesday or Wednesday morning. And these are the everyday quotidian pursuits that are also part of our personal project system. But there are some projects without which our lives may lack meaning utterly. The philosopher Bernard Williams talked about ground projects, which are very similar to my core projects, without which you may question whether to go on at all. It gets right down to some very deep existential questions about whether life is worth pursuing if you don't have ground projects which bring meaning to your life. Now, it's not all grand, magnificent obsessions, as I once called it in an article. Some of them seem to be trivial pursuits. But once you talk about a person's projects, you get into things about the social, cultural aspect of their lives, so that, and the physical, environmental aspects of their lives. So you may say that putting the dog out to run in the yard is a pretty trivial pursuit. You're not going to list that as a project. But if you are disabled and you have a walker and you can't get down the stairs because the coding is such in your neighborhood that the stairs are too narrow, then that simple trivial pursuit turns into a much more demanding project. And there are some projects in our lives, like get a better education, that are great until you realize that in your culture they are proscribed. Don't even think of getting an education if you're a girl in some countries. And so once you start getting away from traits and into projects, you start looking at the mucky aspects of muddling through complex lives.
Are you talking then about purpose? Is core project the same thing as purpose? And what I'm wondering is, if you have some sort of passion core project that you believe in it so fully, it can make you act in a way that is not natural to you. So I'm just thinking like an example. Is that right? Okay. So let's say you have someone who by nature is an introvert, right?
Yes.
And, they really are more reclusive. They have minimal contact with people. They're just happy being by themselves. But let's say they're motivated by something to do with social justice.
Yes.
There's a project they have and they believe so heartedly in it that they will go out, they will speak to crowds, they will champion this cause, and they will act out of their nature. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. And I think this is where the grand and subtle and redemptive qualities of human personality play out. It's not just in the automatic unfolding of your traits. It is in these complexities and contingencies of acting out of character in order to advance projects in your lives that you find human courage. You find sensitivity. You find an enormous amount of resolve, purpose, if you wish, that helps you make meaning in your life. It also may be such that you act out of character in order to advance the well-being of other people. Your projects are embedded in a social matrix, so that you may have a personal project of losing 20 pounds. So every day you're jogging. As soon as you come home, you're driven by that purpose. What you may not realize is that your kids and your partner have their projects. And that is, as soon as you get home, they want to talk to you. They want to tell you about their day. But no, I'm off on my jogging. And so you have a project conflict, of a seemingly minor nature, but these can accumulate so that you get individuals pursuing their own core projects, unaware of the fact that those projects have to be sustainable. So for me, human flourishing and well-being is contingent on the sustainable pursuit of core projects. And that sustainability involves having sufficient personal meaning that you want to go on, having them manageable so that you don't keep running into yourself, and having connection with others so that you shape it conjointly with those other individuals.
Okay. So, yeah, I think my question relates now to this. Mm-hmm. If, let's say, you are acting out of character because you so believe in this core project, does just that act of acting a kind of against what your natural inclination is, does that have a cost?
Yes, it does. That is what I have postulated, and a lot of empirical research has gone into it, which, to be honest, has been mixed. And I think that the reason the results have been mixed is that we haven't looked at the cumulative effect over a long enough period of time. There is some evidence that engaging in personal projects that involve acting out of character have both benefits and costs. The benefits are at least two. One is that they advance your core project, so that's good. It also is positive in that you stretch yourself. You learn new things. One of the interesting findings, actually, by one of the scholars at Carleton, John Zelensky, has shown that when individuals who are introverted think about going to social engagements, they foreclose on them because they know they won't be happy. However, if you arrange an experiment in which they do go, they will often find that they are very happy there. And so they sort of miswant not going to social events. So if they did increase their resolve and say, I'm going to go to the party, even though right now I just want to turn down that invitation, it stretches them in ways where they find out, it wasn't that bad. It was actually quite fun. So those two positive things need to be taken into account and balanced against the costs. And I've argued for many years that protractedly acting out of character can lead to burnout. And so many people listening to this podcast may have been acting out of character for 15 years. Why? Because they love their partner. The partner loves to go to social events, loves to have all sorts of things that are socially and exciting and adventurous. And you do it because you adore your partner. But you may just be discovering now, mid-age, that you're burned out. You love him dearly, but it's costing you. And you've got sympathetic nervous system evidence, you have levels of stress, and you need to find what I call a restorative niche. And a restorative niche is a place where you can repair to, in a sense, access your first nature. So, as an introvert, as I am, after lecturing, excuse me, I often just like to go for a long walk and get away, or occasionally I have to hide in a washroom with my feet up to avoid anybody talking to me. And I've done that. Sometimes it's quite embarrassing. And I find that mitigates the cost. So we have acting out of character. It has benefits. It has costs. And those costs can be, I think, quite serious if it's protracted. The exact parameters of protractedness are things we're still working on in our research. So I don't think it's just a couple of weeks. Excuse me. I think it's more like months.
Okay. So I'm wondering now, do we necessarily need a core project to change? Like, does there have to be some sort of a tangible end result in order for us to change our innate behavior? So I'm going to think of an example here. Let's say we're talking about agreeableness, right?
Yeah.
And I'm a disagreeable person. I'm just disagreeable.
Yep.
But I don't want to be that way.
Yes.
I would like to change and be more agreeable. Can I not just change just because of that want?
Just because I want to. Great question. That's a hard one for me because the whole issue of trying to change from disagreeable to agreeable, yes, you can do it. But why would you be paying a price for acting more agreeably? And I think I've actually seen people who have tried because of a project where, Doug, I want you to be on your best behavior for this whole retreat. I know you're cynical. I know you're angry that you have to be on this retreat, but look at me. You're going to be nice. And he is. He's a loving, beautiful, warm, cuddly Dougie for the whole retreat. But boy, when he gets home, he just wants to go out and punch a bag and act in a disagreement. He won't beat his pussycats up or anything like that, but he will probably want to watch wrestling or engage in things that are his more natural bent. Whereas a naturally agreeable person who's been naturally agreeable comes home and is agreeable. I had a lovely time. The people were so loving. The disagreeable person is like to say, yeah, I sucked it up and I was a nice Doug.
See, but in that example you gave, there was still a kind of end game to that, right? And that was the fact that he was nice to his colleagues and at an event. I'm just talking about in sort of an abstract way. You just think you should be a nice person, generally speaking. You realize that it's having a damaging effect by being disagreeable, but it's not as if I need to be nice at this event. I need to be nice because it's a Christmas party. I need to be nice because whatever. You know what I mean?
Right. Actually, other colleagues, other researchers have been studying that recently. And people do seem to be able to change without having that, as it were, site-specific, as Robin Williams used to call it, site-specific extroversion or agreeableness and so on. People can do that. Some are harder to change than others. And some can be, that all of them can be enhanced by learning specific behaviors that you can deploy when you need to act more agreeably or more extrovertedly or more conscientiously. And so it's not linked to a specific project. My colleagues are looking at studies that are more general. And it seems to be that you can do this. Now, I am always a bit skeptical that if it doesn't change the biogenic aspects of our personality, that's the actual neurophysiological substrata, then can you really call it trait change? And I must say, not too many of my colleagues agree with me that we need to be that restrictive. They say if you change the frequency with which you engage in agreeable behavior, then you become more agreeable or you become more extroverted. I would say, let's see if so I take a somewhat more conservative view that I want to see the biogenic change as well as the outward signs of the behavior. But that's just me. My position isn't that popular, to be honest.
I am, deeply disturbed because we have not finished this discussion because there were other questions, so many more I needed to ask you about, but we've run out of time.
Oh, goodness me. Yes.
Thank you for joining us today.
Delighted. Thank you so much, Mary.
I've been speaking with Brian Little. He's a pioneer in the study of human personality and well-being. He's a distinguished research professor emeritus at Carleton University and has taught at many schools, including Cambridge, Harvard, McGill, and Oxford. And he's the author of 3 books on personality, including Me, Myself, and Us, The Science of Personality and the Art of Well-Being. You can check out his TED Talks as well. We've got lots of info on Brian, so please check out our show notes. That is it for this edition of the Cram Podcast. We hope you enjoyed it, and our thanks to the Temerty Foundation for their generous support. Thanks very much for joining us, and see you here next time.